Have you ever heard stories about places so cursed that people who go in never come out? Tonight, we're going deep into one of those legends, a tale that will make you question what's real and what lurks in the shadows. This is the story of the abandoned railway tunnel, a place where echoes of the past refuse to die. And it's the story of Arif, a man who dared to challenge its curse. They say that after midnight, the tunnel claims anyone who enters. It's a local ghost story, the kind whispered around campfires to scare kids. But Arif wasn't a kid, and he certainly wasn't scared. He was a skeptic, a man who believed in logic and reason, not ghosts and ghouls. For him, the tunnel was just an old, forgotten piece of history, filled with nothing more than dust and decay. He figured the stories were just a way for parents to keep their teenagers from getting into trouble. So, on a moonless Tuesday night, with the clock ticking past midnight, he decided to prove everyone wrong. Armed with nothing but his smartphone and a healthy dose of disbelief, he drove to the edge of the forgotten tracks. The air was heavy and still, the kind of quiet that feels louder than noise. The entrance to the tunnel loomed before him like a giant, gaping mouth, ready to swallow the darkness. It was built over a century ago, a relic of a bygone era. Weeds and vines clung to its stone facade, nature slowly reclaiming what man had built. Arif took a deep breath, the cold night air filling his lungs, and he stepped onto the gravel path leading inside. He felt a small thrill, the kind you get when you're breaking a rule, even if it's a superstitious one. He turned on his phone's flashlight, its bright beam cutting a sharp path through the absolute blackness ahead. The ground was uneven, littered with loose stones and discarded debris. The air inside was immediately different, damp, musty, with the smell of wet earth and something else. Something faintly metallic, like old rust. He walked deeper, the sound of his own footsteps crunching on the gravel, echoing unnervingly around him. The further he went, the more the world outside seemed to disappear. The entrance, once a pale sliver of moonlight, was now just a distant memory. He was completely surrounded by the tunnel's oppressive darkness, with only his phone's light to guide him. He chuckled to himself. See? Nothing here, he thought. Just an old, smelly tunnel. He pulled out his phone to record a quick video, a little "I told you so" for his friends. "All right, everyone," he began. "I'm in the infamous haunted tunnel. It's a little spooky, I'll admit, but definitely no ghosts." And that's when it happened. The flashlight on his phone, which was at full battery, began to flicker, on, off a random, stuttering pulse. Arif tapped the back of his phone. "Weird," he muttered. He tried turning the flashlight off and on again, but the flickering continued. A knot of unease began to form in his stomach. It was probably just a glitch, a software bug. Phones do strange things sometimes. He tried to rationalize it, to brush it off, but the perfect timing was hard to ignore. The darkness was closing in during the brief moments the light went out, and it felt heavier. He decided to push forward. "It's just a phone glitch," he said aloud, his voice sounding small and weak in the vast emptiness. He held the phone tighter, as if his grip could somehow force the light to stay steady. The flickering became more frantic, more erratic. It was like a Morse code message he couldn't decipher. A cold draft snaked its way down the tunnel, carrying a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. It felt like it came from the very stones around him. It was then, in the suffocating silence, that he felt a sudden, primal urge. He didn't know why, but he felt compelled to speak. To ask the question that was now screaming in his mind. He lowered his voice to a whisper, almost afraid of the answer he might receive. "Is anyone here?" The words hung in the air for a moment, swallowed by the darkness. He held his breath, listening. For a second, there was nothing but the drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the distance. He almost let out a sigh of relief, and then he heard it. It started faintly, so quiet he wasn't sure if he'd imagined it. But then it grew louder, echoing from the far end of the tunnel, bouncing off the curved stone walls. It was the sound of a child's laughter, not a happy, playful laugh. This was a cold, hollow sound, filled with a strange, unsettling glee. It was the kind of laughter you'd hear in a nightmare. Arif froze, every muscle in his body locked up. The skepticism he'd walked in with evaporated in an instant, replaced by a pure ice-cold fear. This wasn't a recording. It wasn't the wind. It was real. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the chilling silence that followed the laugh. His hand, holding the phone, began to shake uncontrollably, causing the flickering beam of light to dance wildly across the tunnel walls. He had to see. He had to know what was there. Summoning every ounce of courage he had left, he forced himself to raise the phone and point the light straight down the tunnel into the abyss from where the laughter had come. And there, caught in the spasming beam of his flashlight, was a silhouette. It was small, unmistakably the shape of a little boy, standing maybe 100 feet away. He was just a dark outline against the slightly less dark background. Arif's breath hitched in his throat. He couldn't make out any features, just the shape. But then he noticed something impossible, something that broke every law of physics he knew. The boy's shadow, cast on the tunnel wall behind him, was moving. It was fidgeting, shifting its weight, even waving its little arms. But the boy himself, the silhouette, remained perfectly, unnaturally still. It was like watching a puppet, and its shadow acting independently. The sight was so fundamentally wrong that his brain struggled to process it. Fear is a strange thing. Sometimes it makes you run, other times it paralyzes you, and sometimes it makes you do the one thing you absolutely shouldn't. Driven by a morbid curiosity that outweighed his terror, Arif took a step forward. Then another. He moved slowly, cautiously, his eyes glued to the stationary figure and its dancing shadow. The flickering light from his phone was his only guide, creating a terrifying strobe effect that made the scene even more surreal. Closer, closer. He was about 50 feet away now. He could almost make out the boy's clothes, a small shirt, short pants. He took another step, and just like that, the boy was gone. 1 second he was there, a solid black shape in the distance. The next, there was nothing but the empty, dark tunnel ahead. He hadn't run, he hadn't faded away. He had simply vanished. The space where he stood was now empty, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. The air grew thick, heavy, and a sudden, intense cold wrapped around Arif, so chilling it felt like being plunged into ice water. He felt a presence, not in front of him anymore, but behind him. A prickling sensation crawled up the back of his neck, the kind that signals you are no longer alone. Every instinct screamed at him not to turn around, to run, to just get out of there. But he couldn't. He was frozen again, trapped by a force more powerful than his own will. He had to know, slowly, mechanically, as if his body were no longer his own. He turned, and that's when he saw him. The boy. He was standing right there, no more than a foot away, so close Arif could have reached out and touched him. His face was a ghostly, porcelain white, completely bloodless, like a Victorian doll. But his eyes were the worst part. They weren't eyes at all. They were two pools of absolute blackness, empty voids that seemed to suck in all the light and hope from the world. There were no whites, no irises, just pure, bottomless shadow. Arif stared into those black holes and felt his sanity begin to fray. The boy looked up at him, his expressionless face holding a knowledge far beyond his apparent years. A small, pale mouth opened, and a whisper, like the rustling of dry leaves, slithered into Arif's ear. "You shouldn't have come here." The words hit Arif like a physical blow. The last thread of his courage snapped. A raw, guttural scream tore from his throat, but it felt like no sound was coming out. His hand went limp. The phone slipped from his grasp, tumbling to the hard ground. It landed face down, and with a sickening crack, the screen shattered. The flickering flashlight, his only connection to the world of light and reason, died. The entire tunnel was plunged into absolute, impenetrable darkness. It was a blackness so total it felt like a physical substance, pressing in on him, suffocating him. The next morning, when Arif didn't return home, his family called the police. They knew where he'd gone. A rescue team was dispatched to the abandoned railway tunnel. They walked the same path Arif had, though in the safety of daylight, the tunnel seemed less menacing, just old and derelict. About halfway through, they found it a smartphone lying on the gravel, its screen smashed to pieces. It was Arif's phone. They searched the entire length of the tunnel, every dark corner, every crevice. They searched the woods on either side. They used dogs, thermal cameras, everything they had. But Arif was gone. He was never found. It was as if the tunnel had simply swallowed him whole. The phone was taken back as evidence. The technicians in the lab managed to recover the data from its damaged memory. They found the last video Arif had been recording, the one where he was boasting that there were no ghosts. They watched the footage, the flickering light. They heard his nervous whisper, "Is anyone here?" And then they heard the sound that made the color drain from their faces. The recording ended, but the audio kept going for a few more seconds. And in the final, terrifying moments of the file, there was only one sound: the cold, hollow, echoing laughter of a child. So, the next time you hear a local legend about a cursed place, you might want to think twice before you try to debunk it. Some doors are best left unopened, and some shadows are best left undisturbed. Thanks for watching. If this story sent a chill down your spine, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because there are many more dark tales waiting to be told.